Is everybody else ready?
Just keeping time. My phone's dead.
Sweet. One, there is a white elephant in the room. The ghosts of the victims of modernity haunts the halls. The conversations of perform, possessing the souls, and spirits of the manipulating the tactics to be like that practice from Mark Regardless of law. Not until 15. It's impossible to embark upon copies of together with justice without addressing the white elephant in the room. One, there is a white elephant in the room. The ghosts of the victims of modernity haunts the halls. The conversations of perform, possessing the souls, and Mark Regardless of law. to the front of the class. We arrest, kidnap you, find, punish you, and beat you so you can learn. Be deterred, or get rehabilitated. Die in the process because you cannot learn fast enough. You cannot just go along for longer. Learn, makes it a piece of relationship. The more difficult stuff to do, less you are, that life is possible. When you're running with the reality of the room, you just try to find towards the service free. I'm just going to be here.
That won't work if it's like on that blue block.
Okay.
And just choose like normal style out of that blue file. There it is.
Is this one in C7? Title? Well, I have it.
It's a very rich.
Oh, did I have it?
Oh, sorry. I think that I have it.
No, I have it.
Can you give us your order?
Yeah.
I'm gonna know that's there, but
So there's going to be an overview on top. One off, straight down case. Were you able to access it?
Oh, yeah.
Perfect.
Yes.
Is everyone ready?
Mm-hmm.
Jana?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The system in which we live is the destruction of the sanctity of bodily autonomy. The recent slaughter at Georgia Tech of Scout Schultz is an indictment upon the system in which we live, where queer bodies are slaughtered down simply because they go against the norm in which society sets down. This debate is a question of methodology. A question of what is the best method to pursue a change in a system that all agree examines itself in a root of oppression. First is the framework. The role of the ballot is to vote for the debater who best queers the orientation of this debate space. On May of 2006, to queers to disturb the order of things, the reproduction of things is about what is assumed to be reachable. Heterosexuality is a compulsory orientation, reproduces more than itself. It is a mechanism for the reproduction of culture, or even the attributes that are assumed to pass along a family line, such as whiteness. Queer as a sexual orientation, queer is more than sex, just as other kinds of queer effects can in turn end up queering sex. Sexual disorientation slides quickly into social disorientation. What is familiar becomes rather strange. Next is the link. Single-issue movements and reforms of the state recreate the system. This is Herod of 2007. We cannot destroy capitalism with single-issue campaigns. What we are doing is spending our lives trying to fix a system that generates evils faster than we can ever eradicate them. While some of these campaigns use direct action, for the most part, the campaigns are aimed at passing legislation in Congress to correct the problem. Reforms that are won in one decade can easily be wiped off the books the following decade. Got the card there. Next is the implication. Capitalism crafts heteronormativity to oppress the queer body, creates fear and control of the queer body. Thurman of 2015. Heteronormativity and its violence against queerness is one such social formation mobilized for the purpose of upholding hierarchical capitalist relations. The subordination of queerness leads us to strip those who embody queerness in social life of their power, legitimacy, and authority, thus producing a hierarchical power differential where queerness is considered inappropriate and heteronormativity is considered right and acceptable. The subordination of queerness is prominent in the workplace, thereby supporting and justifying a hierarchical capitalist work structure. When the expression of queerness is widely subordinated and feared in society, we are more easily controlled in our work environments under capitalism. We are forced to abide to supposedly appropriate heteronormative work standards that repress and subordinate the expression of our queerness under capitalism. Next is the alt. Embrace an intersectional, queer, anarchist position to break from all hierarchical structures which capitalism supports. First is the solvency. Only an anarchist paradigm rejects all hierarchies by creating bottom organization that prevents oppression. Gabagaz, Ottawa, 2010. Anarchy must be based on class, but it must also be feminist, indigenous, anti-racist, anti-ableist, anti-heteronormative, etc. All forms of hierarchy must be opposed. A victory against one form of oppression is a best and incomplete victory. Hierarchies and oppressions cannot be dealt with implicitly or at a later date. They must be confronted head-on. The minutiae that they recognize. The concept of intersectionality is useful here. It is counterproductive to rate the importance of various social struggles. There are no primary and secondary struggles. Anarchism provides a theoretical frame to seek out and oppose all forms of hierarchy and oppression. Anarchism does not allow for any form of hierarchy to exist. There is also the possibility of the existence of oppression. Hitherto unidentified, however, does not mean that while any form of racism, sexism, ableism, etc. could possibly be assimilated into a capitalist or stated worldview, they could never be assimilated into an anarchist worldview. Got the card there. And The queering of space will disturb the normalcy. Ahmed of 2006. To make things queer is certainly to disturb the order of things. Heterosexuality is a compulsory orientation, reproduces more than itself. It is a mechanism for the reproduction of culture or even the attributes that are assumed to pass along a family line, such as whiteness. It is for this reason that queer is a sexual orientation. Queer is more than sex. The effects are indeed uncanny. What is familiar, what is passed over in the veil of familiarity becomes rather strange. On to case. On the first point of analysis on case, all discussion requires a refocusing of values and ethics. It is essential that the normative system in which we live is immediately broken away from. The status of the state, of all politics in general, is still at work within the prefixes of the 1AC. Meaning that to truly break from the entity of normalcy and to allow for true queer liberation is to break away from the totality of those institutions of power. On the next point of analysis, 2 responses. 1. All systemic violence exists from the totality of a broken mode of discourse. Discourse has been structured pre-fiat in this discussion because we all recognize the flaws of independent discussions on the ideas, from things such as queer discussions to race to feminism. All of these discussions are inherently broken by the fact that we enter into these debates from a mindset of normalcy. So we must break away from that normalcy if there is ever to be a change in these discussions that is enacted through the alternative of the K. Second, the system in its entirety must be completely reduced to a position of new. Newness must be the answer to these problems that we engage in. That we must build from the bottom up a new discourse that is engaged with by all modes of oppression. On the next point of analysis on normative ways of questioning white supremacy. The state inevitably will re-co-opt any form of resistance that doesn't engage in a complete and total rejection of the system in and of itself. We can't assume action in the pre-fiat realm is the equivalent of change in the post-fiat realm. We must have a system that engages the totality of the ethic of all modes of power that then allows us to change that distinction in the realm post-fiat. On to the next point about abolishing the penal system releases us. 2 responses. First, this gets to the heart of the discussion about total liberation, about moving away from systems that allow for people of all forms to be oppressed in a system that allows things such as queer violence. We should never engage with a system that inevitably lets that happen. Simply abolishing the system of crime does nothing to change the fact that new forms of crime inevitably get recreated by the state, or 2, simply get repealed 10 years down the line. If you extend the Herod of 7 evidence on the critique, it makes this point very clear. That the essence of power, that the essence of capitalism and all structures of authority inevitably will try to recreate themselves, which means total abolition is the only effective move forward that breaks away and avoids the implications of heteronormative capitalism, that allows us to not be structurally assigned to means of production as to what is our own individual social value. This debate is a debate of methodology, not a debate of implication. Yes?
What does it mean to queer the space?
Ahmed is talking to the idea that when we enter into discussions, we enter into a preset field, that we already assume the way in which things should be engaged in. The way in which we queer is breaking from that, meaning instead of engaging in the assumption that state action is essential, we need to move away from that notion.
Okay, so you also make the argument that, you make the argument that we have to walk into the debate space, like with a queer mindset. How do we do that?
Excellent question. The way in which the queer enters into the, quote, normal mode of debate is by recognizing that the normal means of debate, engaging with the state, is the pre-fiat burden that assumes that affirmatives and negatives have to abide under. This criticism is not just a criticism of, say, the 1AC's usage of the state. It is a criticism of the debate space in and of itself. that assumes that there are certain means in which we should be engaging one another in debate, and it's that engagement that needs to be queered.
Okay, cool. Okay, so on your critique, you indicate that like it's not just like one of your solvency cards indicates that disturbing normalcy is not just being like queer as in sexual orientation; it's also being like a black woman, right?
I would agree with that.
Okay,
yes.
okay, so like your role of the ballot indicates that who best queers the space, right?
Yeah, and I think that through the advocacy of speech acts, it is essential that the role of the ballot be what actually breaks that normalcy.
Okay.
And that normalcy should be, I think, in the preeminence of stopping state politics.
Okay, what is anarchy?
Sure. So, in the sense of what the Common Cause of Ottawa card talks about, is that anarchy is a means to change. Anarchy is an assumption that all forms of hierarchy are bad. Now, it says that rules are not necessarily a problem. It's that when we condition ourselves to allow for rulers, that we need to move away from them.
Okay, so like in this room, like the judges, like they judge us, we like abide by the time rules because like they think that's a good idea. Is that not like creating that rule and rulers?
I agree. Like I think that in the scope of like fundamental debate, if it becomes a necessity to where we have to engage beyond time limits because the advocacy is so important, that's totally chill with me. So I think that's an advocacy of the 1NC.
So if I gave a 10-minute speech,
I would happily listen to a 10-minute speech.
Cool. Okay. I'm gonna take care of it. I'm sending and dropping.
Okay.
The order is F, framework, case. Sorry, the F framework and the cane. Sorry.
Okay, when you say framework, are you talking about the negative framework?
Yeah, the negative framework.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll go through myself 2 minutes.
Amen. Alright.
I don't need to understand me either, right? So. Okay. Alright.
I'll give it a read.
Okay. Is everybody else ready? Yeah. Okay, awesome. The resolutions call for reforms to the trick. We are to believe that if we keep reforming, eventually the beatings and killings don't stop. But they don't, and they won't ever until we reorient ourselves with black feminist ontology and destroy the recreation of slavery, the police. These systems are practically haunted by anti-black sins, both past and present. We must exercise the system of anti-blackness to abolishing the penal system, rupturing what is perceived to be right, and while exposing the system for what it truly is. The act is a fugitive act against the resolution because we are the U.S. Mainly in 2010, the federal government are our distant body under our control. We are the federal government is not general apathy that allow our government to do the things that we don't want. We are the USFG, which means all of his arguments about how we have to break away from the normal system. Me referencing myself as and us in this space as the United States federal government is the ultimate queer. It is ultimate queerness. He says we have to. He says the queer liberation is breaking all the way through. I think that a more specific policy like Solana not indicates about abolishing the police and arguing about whether or not that is a good or bad is important. Also, Solana indicates that we have to reorient ourselves to the black feminist ontology before we can take any action. He has conceded this in his last speech, which means that you will ask. He says that the discourse has to be broken. When we enter into the debate space, I have read a fugitivity act, which is the ultimate breaking away from the normalcy. He total liberation, that all structures try to recreate themselves, and that's true. That's exactly the argument that the law not indicates, which is why we have to reorient ourselves with black feminist ontology to go to framework. First, I mean his interpretation. What is more queer than to be a black queer woman in this space? My very existence in this space is queerness. Not only that, we should extend this law. Not piece of evidence, virginity, that fugitivity would be the ultimate form of queerness, because we are literally running away. And also, the world brothers who rise produce knowledge on base westernized hegemonic knowledge production. They don't mean they only address single bosses of oppression. Vote act to each perm to the act and embrace an intersectional queer anarchist position to break away from all higher obstruction within capitalist war. Being a fugitive is stealing yourself, the work black woman, stealing language away from the system that tries to commodify it. The fugitivity is the ultimate anti-capitalist queer and anarchist act. So much discussion of capitalism is haunted. Their refusal to acknowledge slavery's role will ensure alternative failure. Only the permutation solves. That's the law. Number 3. Sorry, I'm on the K proper. My bad. Also, 3. The queer political body is inevitably fetishized and participates in the sustenance of racial structure, suffocates all possibility of racial liberation. This from in 2013. The subject fetishized queer political body participates in the redaction and sustenance of racialized structures with its recognition of sexual orientation and gender identity, whereby white bodies become signifiers of legitimate radical alternative in the form of queerness, and blacks are presumed imminently and capacious, never registering as legitimate. The moves in outline above constitute not only a straight jacketing of sexuality, but also racial terror, where gay rights becomes a discourse and a practice of racial superiority. Queer economies could not and do not escape being entangled within capital's foundational terror. And 4. Queer theory fails to practice of some fame in 2008. The pluralizing of identity continues to generate the points of race, class, and gender concerns about the open-ended political program under queer theory. And queer is fluid, boundless, oppositional, and multifaceted. Can reorganize around difference on grounded politics, market politics, and 5 per do the act. The act includes an analysis of capitalism and queer theory, which means at best the alternatives plan minus the black feminist ontology. That makes the part legitimate. It also makes the act a diss to the alternative. Not only that, all is whiteology will remain unfinished and haunted by the ghost, which produces the impacts of the act and the can. There's a diss to the alternative. The masking diss at the alternative creates a false solution, presuming that oppression disappears because it's addressed, because they address oppression, but the ghost of slavery remains controlling all of the people and the systems. That's the law. Number 3. Not only that, he says the system will recreate the system will recreate itself. I already answered that. He also want to talk about his arguments about anarchy, his solemnity arguments. The idea of anarchy is inherently anti-black. You don't think about how look back the black bodies we're not allowed to break the rules. It is different when it comes to him and in this room, because if I break the rules, then I get punished. For instance, he is allowed to wear he's allowed to wear suspenders, and he's not perceived differently. However, if I was coming here with a Black Lives Matter t-shirt, I would be. And 8. The recognition of fugitivity is great for the dialectical relationship between master and slave. Rather than accepting the thesis of property and owner, the fugitive demands analysis of its own human capacity from whence black authenticity can rise. Vote in 2008. Can only briefly glance at the immensely beautiful problem of poetry of race of a certain underground social aid, achieve and dangerous socialism that compromises, criminalized, and differentiated inferiority of black cooperation that will have constituted the very ground of externally directed non-cooperation. The pathological is the black which has been pictured both of the absence of color and is as excessively pathologically colorful. The question isn't whether or not the disorderly behavior of the anti-colonialist is pathological or natural. The question rather concerns what the vast range of black authenticities, and it does. What is the efficiency of that range of natural born disorders that have been regulated to what is theorized as to avoid blackness or black social life but that may have been properly understood as a fugitive being infinite humanity. Humanity. I'm going to show you where I marked it. Yeah. Okay, so it's right there.
And was this on the alts? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Alright, how much work did I have left, Chad?
You're 19. Wait, no, you're 230.
230, yeah. Alright, start prep.
No, I didn't read the code. Okay.
Discussion on top from the last speech, and then just going to go straight down the flow from the previous speech. Are you ready? Everybody else ready to go? Let's start by talking about the analysis that reform is a trick. This feeds into the analysis of the 1NC, giving into notions of federal action as part of the reason why the critique was run in the first place, because the pre-fiat realm in which we are existing once we walk into the debate space is part of the thing in which we are challenging with your ballot to say that the queering of debate should be engaging, and saying that reform in and of itself is part of the problem, that the 1AC's acceptance of federal action just continues on with what the Herod of 7 evidence is talking about. Next. The argument that as an actor in these spaces creates the ultimate station of queerness. The ultimate act of queering doesn't exist in any space now. That exists post the acceptance of the 1NC's ballot. That only breaking the normalcy of acceptance that federal action is essential is the way in which the ultimate act of queerness exists. This is the divergence in methodology between the 1AC and the 1NC, and creates the link in which the impacts are triggered. The idea that the acceptance of federal action continues in the world of the 1AC. Moving down to the K analysis. On the analysis about I meet what is more queer, I will not engage and say that there is a lack of queerness coming from the 1AC as an advocacy in and of itself. I think that is net regressive for the engagement of the debate. I think that the debate itself needs to be focused in on how the link scenario itself plays into how we engage with one another in the scope of implications and how those debates actually play out. Next, onto the firm do both. This is the co-option of the state. She exists in the mode of the state as she explains in the previous speech. That she is the actor playing the role of the federal government. That playing of the role is part of the problem of this debate in the pre-fiat realm. That the framework of Ahmed of 06 is specifically pointing to the fact that a permutation would be literally impossible in the scope of saying that I can both queer the institution while retaining the institution as it is. Next on to the analysis about queer political body is inevitable, fetishized, and participates in suffering. That is only in the world in which we continue to allow state politics to retain themselves. The idea of the Herod of 7, that its warrants that go unrefuted, is the most important issue in this round. Because the idea that we don't change the system in totality means that 10 years down the line, any kind of reform efforts inevitably gets co-opted by the state and used in a way that is net regressive to all oppressional struggles. Next, the idea that queer theory fails in practice. I completely disagree with this notion, and I think Ahmed previously cited would as well, because how we orient ourselves in the space affects others and the institutions around us. Spaces acquire the skin of the bodies that inhabit them. Spaces take shape by oriented around some bodies more than others. Consider institutions as orientation devices which take the shape of what resides within. When we describe an institution, we are pointing to how institutional spaces are shaped by the proximity of some bodies and not others. The speech act becomes an object which gathers around us. The internal warrants of that piece of evidence that she uses ignores the fundamental focus of what Ahmed's queer theory is trying to analyze, in saying that the way in which we place ourselves in proximity to the object that in this case is the debate space is part of the very problem, that we have not allowed the debate space to fundamentally change because we have accepted the normalcy of state action. Next, the idea of perm du af. At worst, the K is simply plan plus. At worst, that is what this debate comes down to. But I don't think that the co-option that exists throughout the debate is actually going to prove to you why you should vote against the negative critique in that world. Because the co-option of systems per Herald of Seven, that again goes completely unrefuted within the internal warrants, expresses the idea that if we allow the state to continue to exist, there will be no shift in the power dynamics, because that dynamic recreates itself in different modes. Instead of a public sphere of police brutality, it becomes a private sphere of police brutality. Next, on the masking disab. The act of the 1NC is the removal of the true mask. The idea that the state is not the one culpable versus the idea that it is simply the criminal justice system of the United States. It is a far deeper problem that needs to be unmasked, which is the true act of the 1NC. On to alt solvency and impact voters. First, real quickly on the idea of anarchy being anti-black. Her analysis posits why the debate space needs to be queer. The existence of BLM necessitates a rejection of state politics in totality. And finally, the break from dialectical relation, the Motten of 08 evidence. Very good piece of evidence, but I think misses a very fundamental point. It deals in the realm of social pathology, which necessitates changes in the biosocial location in which we have ourselves originated from. Meaning that when we enter the debate space, our social pathology, if it is to be queer, must totally be changed, which means a complete and utter rejection, which leads me to the reason why you vote. At the end of the day, we are in agreement on implications. It's a question of methodology. The only way to totally remove oppression within the system is by breaking the state and all hierarchies of power through an intersectional queer movement.
319.
going to framework first, so.
Is there any new cards?
Nope. I didn't know. No new cards.
Name framework before the app?
No, app, and then I'll go straight down the K. I'll put framework first.
Okay.
Ready? You can pull a trigger now. He has conceded that black feminist ontology must first draw the lines between slavery and the criminal justice system allows for a reorientation. 1AC number 3 says that if we don't do that first, it's not just the system, but the people that will remain within this frame of mind, which means that the alternative will ultimately recreate the white supremacy that the is talking about. He will also recreate his own impacts. We have to be able to reformulate the way that we think about the criminal justice system. He has made the arguments that the federal government. He has made his arguments about the federal government, how pre-FIA is bad. However, I read in last piece, the Rambling Shells and take these weapons Virginia 6 in here, which indicates that I view the United States federal government as we in this space. That is not about FIA. I never said that I FIA-ed the plan. He also said that the ultimate act of queerness doesn't exist now because you can't accept the federal government. The act never accept the federal government. This law of some evidence indicate that the federal government ultimately is what recreates these types of system, which why the act does not defend the federal government as a capital federal government, but rather as we in this space, their framework. You should extend the we-me argument, the I-me argument on his framework. He does not contest this, which means that that I read his frame of mind, which means that you can role act should also extend the role of my role of the which indicates that you who breaks for westernized knowledge. He doesn't. The only way to do that, first of all, indicates that we have to reorient ourselves. Only the app does that. Go to the K proper. You should extend permutation to the app and embrace the intersectional queer and our disposition to break from all hierarchical structures within which capitalism supports. He has made a plan plus argument, which means that he has said at the end of the debate that the alternative is plan plus, which means that is permutation to both. He has conceded that is able to solve. He indicates that it's going that I'm role playing. That's not true. We are the federal. We are the federal government is not role playing as the capital federal government, saying that we are in charge. He also says that it's impossible because we don't retain the state as in normalcy. We reorient. You should also group all his state arguments and reform these co-opted arguments on a couple of answers. One, the act is not that's not the act. It's a reorientation is able to solve says the black feminist ontology is able to resolve all of these issues. But there two, we are in control of who of the federal government right now, which means that I, as a queer black woman, am in charge. It's the ultimate queer fugitivity is an ultimate act of the ultimate act of taking things away from the same the way that we view it. He also indicates, listen, you can vote on permutation, do both, or just on the fact that black feminist ontology comes first because it's gone unanswered throughout the entirety of the debate. He has also conceded that I meet his framework, which means there's no reason to vote negative. live stream this too, or are you gonna make them wait?
No, I'm live streaming this as well.
Okay.
Congratulations to both of you for making it to the final round. It is a unanimous decision for the affirmative.
So I vote on the ontology must come first, as that argument proceeds coming out of the NR. A couple of things about AC and NC construction for me. I understand what you're saying about ontology, right? Like, that makes sense, but I don't understand, coming out of the AC, how ontology is related to plain text or anything after the first two cards. I will admit this could, or the first, three cards. I will admit this could be my migraine, and my brain not functioning at full capacity, but I don't fully see how ontology continues after.
Okay, I got you. No, I get you.
Okay. And so I think clarity in that would make your position a lot easier to win.
Okay.
Even with a panel that is not us. Does that make sense?
Yes, I got you.
I don't understand how I intersectionally queer something, because queer means, like, when you say intersectionally queer it, my brain immediately goes to that queering comes before any other form of intersectionality, which then makes me question on whether or not I can bring any, like, what do I do about people that believe the state is good? How do I solve that? Like, there's a lot of problems I have with the wording of
That's fair.
the alternative, and I don't understand how it functions.
That's good. Okay.
Do you have questions for me? Sweet, y'all know how to get a hold of me. I'm gonna go lay down in the dark.
Okay. I hope your migraine gets better.
I can go next. I'm more or less echoing. Ultimately, the presupposition of black feminist ontology was the voting decision. I'm also not sure why we can't perm. Like, I don't understand how they don't work together. But I also had the same confusion on your half. And for me, there was also, you know, if maybe if I read the card, all the super small text in great detail, I would get it. But there seems to be a discrepancy of scope between a couple of your solvency cards. One of them refers to the penal system overall, and then the second one is the abolishment of police, which is only one small part, or how abolishing police.
Okay,
is,
I get, we're here. I get what you're saying.
Yeah. So I was a little confused about that. Ultimately, it didn't come down to be a deciding factor, but you may want to address the scope discrepancy in your solvency.
I voted mostly on the permutation, though I also thought there was a substantial risk of the haunting DA to the alternative. I've seen the ad like 4 times this weekend, so like I think I can like kind of like now directly kind of point to you the part that like she's referencing. I'll just read it. It says, these assumptions are distinctly colonizing, can only be addressed by penal abolitionists if viewed through black feminist ontology's knowledge of colonial race relations is inherently abusive. When we locate abuse, we empower ourselves with a language that articulates criminal justice violence as inexcusable. We effectively change the conversation from one that pleads to one that speaks directly to the oppressive force. I think that's the kind of like argument that like the neg link argument really isn't dealing with, which is that in cross-sec, she straight up tells you a acceptance and endorsement of a black feminist ontology is a precondition to my accepting the text as was written. And so I don't, in my opinion, view the plan through the lens of a normative understanding of a plan text. And I think that all of your link arguments, and definitely your Herod and 7 evidence, all definitely like make that assumption that how we interpret what the plan is normative. And I think that she's arguing that the acceptance of a black feminist ontology, and that line I think just 100% says it, fundamentally reorients that discussion. The second thing I think you need to deal with a lot better is the argument that slavery haunts the alternative. I think the AF and the 2ER could be a little better there, explaining kind of some of those like more fundamental things about like why chattel slavery would haunt something like the alternative. I think I maybe gave that critique earlier as well, just like that brief like description about like the differences that exist between a contingent form of violence and one that is structured through civil society and ontological. And I think like there's a good body of research you could use to make that distinction, even in the context of this app and this alternative.
Okay.
You honestly kind of get there just with your own analysis when you talk about the difference between how he can wear like suspenders and you couldn't wear a BLM shirt without like not being taken seriously. I think that was like a good point, though it wasn't a part of my decision, obviously. The other thing that I think is kind of a problem is this idea that we are the USFG. I think that you interpreted that as role-playing, and I just didn't. And so maybe that's a cross-ex thing, like more like firmly pinning down like what the plan does. I'm pretty charitable on her explanation of that, because like in cross-ex she definitely said like this isn't a normal plan. Like if someone says we're gonna like accept some sort of like ontological position as a precondition to the plan, I feel like that should be like oh, maybe there's something a little tricky here, which obviously you did, but like in terms of the debate, that's how I felt that it played out. The last thing for tips for the AF, I think you should be jumping like all over this last Ahmed card that he read, because I think it kind of supports the argument you're making at the top, which is that as you enter debate, as you said, if you identified as a black queer woman, that like your presence just queered the space. By the mere fact that you got up and spoke, that you got up this morning, like how did that not queer space? Like I think you need to get like a little more aggressive on like some of those things about like why does he bracket like existence just like being alive and like living from like the arguments that you make during the like preset time that you're supposed to make them during your speech. And I feel like if you get more aggressive on that, some of those like tensions that are always going to exist whenever you read some sort of argument that relies on like a queer criticism, like in a debate round that inherently has so many normative prescriptions, like I think could get exposed a lot more, and I think you could like impact it a little bit more. The last thing that I think that you could do a little better is just like, what is the police to you? Is like a question I would be asking him, like because like in cross-ex it felt like the understanding that I was getting from you was that like police isn't like the local state and local officers that you see with the like uniforms. Like the cross explanation I got from you was like the police are the totality of bodies that hold blackness in captivity, and we're like fugitives, like stealing away from that. And I feel like that could have definitely been in the 1AR, 2AR, because like kind of like the way that he tries to like pin down the advocacy into like a prescriptive call for the federal government to abolish this like entity of state and local police, like doesn't really, in my opinion, jive with like at least the cross-ex explanation of like what you did. It seems to me that you were saying, look, we should adopt a black feminist ontology, and with that, within that perspective, like steal away from like the fugitivity, or steal away from the captivity of anti-blackness. And I think that would also help connect a lot more your argument about how like slavery haunts the alternative. Because I think you could emphasize that fugitivity component as offense against the alternative. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
Congrats, Kia.
Thank you.